Today we're taking a look at the latest NHL trade and free agent rumors. We're looking at the latest on the Toronto Maple Leafs and Zach Hyman. Will they get a deal done? We have the latest on Seth Jones, the potential trade that's coming. We also have the latest potential moves from the New York Islanders, the New York Rangers as well. Will we see the Red Wings weaponize their cap space and take advantage of some desperate teams ahead of the expansion draft? We'll get into all that coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. Now, as I mentioned tonight, we're taking a look at the latest trade and free agent rumors here on the 4th of July. So I certainly want to wish a happy 4th of July to all my American viewers. I certainly hope you enjoyed the holiday down there in the U.S. Now, into today's news, I want to start with the Maple Leafs. And there is a lot of reports from the Toronto media recently indicating that the Leafs and Zach Hyman are still quite a far ways apart here on a new contract extension. And as we get closer and closer to free agency, it does look more and more likely that Zach Hyman very well will end up leaving the Maple Leafs and signing elsewhere. They just cannot afford to give him the term or the AAV that he really deserves after having some real solid years. He's been underpaid for some time just because he's outperformed his last contract by a fair margin. And now it's his one and probably only chance to really cash in here on a home run, longer term contract. Given the fact that Hyman's now in his late 20s, won't be far before he's 30 years old, this is probably his real only shot at a longer term contract. Somewhere between probably 5 to 7 years is what he's looking at. And many believe that he could command somewhere between $5.5 to $6 million on the open market. I'm not sure he'll get 6, but I can certainly see him getting 5 or a little bit better than 5. I do think that's probably a pretty fair margin. A lot of teams will certainly be looking to outbid the Maple Leafs, and it's not going to be too difficult, I don't think, based on what they can actually fit into their cap space situation. Now, they could end up making additional moves, but when you hear the fact that they're interested in maybe bringing back Freddie Anderson, I know I've said before, I think they should trade Morgan Riley to free up space and to maybe restructure that blue line a little bit, but there really isn't any rumors from NHL insiders saying that Riley's on the market. So with those kind of moves that seem logical with Riley being traded, maybe Anderson moving on, but many people felt were, quite likely, they don't seem to necessarily be as likely right now. They've already brought back Jason Spezza. They've already brought back Wayne Simmons. And you have to wonder just how much change there will be within this franchise right now. I do suspect Kyle Dubas will make some changes. He's going to be forced to. But keeping a guy like Hyman in the fold is going to prove to be quite difficult here. And it's really hard to say where he ends up. I mean, I know he's been linked to a lot to a team like Edmonton, but of course they've been linked to some other deals. I'm not really sure that the Oilers will be able to pull that off. I think I can understand the interest, and I think he would be a good fit there. But financially speaking, I'm not sure that they can get that deal done. He may end up having to go to a team that's a little bit more, loose on cap space. We're looking at teams that are lower in the league, whether it be teams like Detroit or New Jersey or Ottawa or Buffalo or one of those teams. I mean, I guess we'll have to determine here what Zach Hyman's, main goal is. Is he more concerned about getting paid as much as possible or winning a Stanley Cup as soon as possible? Obviously, those teams near the bottom of the league can afford to pay him more. They might have interest to come in, be a good guy to work with a lot of their younger players, but he's likely a ways away from winning. So we'll see what happens. But right now, it does look it's quite likely, at least, that Hyman is less likely to return to Toronto. It's difficult to say where he ends up, but it doesn't look like Toronto's looking real good, at least not at the moment. Now, before we jump into today's trade talk, I do want to pause for a moment and acknowledge our channel sponsor, Manscaped. Top Shelf Hockey is proud to be sponsored by Manscaped. Of course, with Manscaped, we have a special offer here for all Top Shelf Hockey viewers where you can get 20% off and free shipping on all orders at manscaped.com. Now, of course, Manscaped just launched a brand new Lawnmower 4.0 trimmer, which is a fantastic product. They've taken the level up here, even again with the skin-safe replaceable blades. It's waterproof, it's wireless charging, has a travel lock on it, as well as a nice light so you don't miss what you're doing. So certainly a terrific product. Now, many people associate Manscaped with their trimmers, which is certainly kind of their top product, but they do have a lot of other great options as well, including what they call the Weed Whacker, which is another trimmer for your ears and nose. And they have a variety of deodorants and sprays as well, which also keep you fresh and are terrific as well. So certainly Manscaped has a lot to offer, and we certainly highly recommend all of their products. So check out manscaped.com and use promo code TSH for 20% off and free shipping. Now, the latest on the Seth Jones trade saga here is still kind of dragging on with the same 4 teams apparently still in the mix, which includes the Flyers, the Avalanche, the Kings, and the Blackhawks, with many feel right now that Chicago, probably the front runners, with Philadelphia being the most aggressive as well. I think Colorado and LA both have high amounts of interest. I'm just not sure they're going to be pushing quite as hard as Philly or Chicago to get a deal done here, but I've seen different reports indicating that the trade talks around Seth Jones from the Columbus side of Jarmo Kekalainen, that they might be looking to use the Erik Karlsson trade from a few years ago from the Senators to the Sharks as kind of like a template or the framework to get a deal done. Obviously, it's going to have to be a little bit different, though. I mean, Karlsson is probably one of the last big-name defensemen to get traded. I mean, we've seen some other guys like Pietrangelo, for example, change teams, but that was through free agency. So when it comes to trades, this is a good one to use. However, you have to think that the return is going to be a decent amount less. Erik Karlsson, at the time that he was traded, was certainly considered to be one of the top players, not only in his position, but in the world at the time. After that 2017 Eastern Conference Finals run with the Senators, where he was so good, many had him in the top 3 to 5 players in the entire league. He was really a step above many guys at that point. The injury, though, that he suffered in those playoffs did derail him, but at that point, many didn't necessarily know how much it was going to impact him longer term. However, before that, Karlsson had 2 Norris trophies to his name. Definitely fair to say that Karlsson was more dynamic offensively, but I think we can say Jones is probably a little stronger defensively. Jones is probably a little bit more well-rounded than Karlsson is or was at that point in his career. But like I said, at the same time, he never has been or likely will be at that level that we saw Karlsson offensively during those peak years when he was winning Norris trophies. So if you look at the haul that the Senators got for Karlsson from San Jose, they got a big amount coming back. And at the time, a lot of it seemed kind of underwhelming, but their draft picks have turned into some good stuff, including Tim Stützle. They got Josh Norris, who was not necessarily considered like a high-level prospect. He was a good prospect, but I don't think the Sharks saw him turning into a 1C on their team, which is what he's turned out to be so far for Ottawa, like being a solid top 6 center, but he's really grown his game to the point that he can be that. So they got themselves 2 top 6 forwards between Stützle and Norris. They also got Dylan DeMello, who was a serviceable defenseman who they ended up trading for a 3rd-round pick. They got Chris Tierney, who's still there as a bottom 6 center, and they had other picks too. So realistically, they got a lot, but at the time, it was, one of those wait-and-see things that seemed underwhelming, but sometimes you don't know what young players are going to turn out to be. So, obviously, in the Jones case, like I said, it's likely going to be fewer pieces. We're probably looking at a 3 to 4 pieces, depending on what those pieces actually turn out to be. I think we're looking at a 1st-round pick. We're probably looking at 1 roster player, and we're probably looking at 2 other players that are either, might have already had some NHL experience, but maybe not full-timers yet, and guys that are, considered to be pretty good prospects. That's likely what the return is going to be at this point. But like I said before, Philly and Chicago seem to be most interested in signing him to an extension, so they will pay a bigger price to get him, and that's going to be more appealing to Columbus. So I think that's certainly going to be a more likely scenario that we see unfold, but you just never know here with the Avs and the Kings. They could, make some other moves to kind of set themselves up to be bigger players for this. At this point, I'm just not sure we really see that being all too logical right now. Now, I also want to reference a recent report here from Larry Brooks taking a look at both the Islanders and the Rangers. Now, when it comes to the New York Rangers, he mentions the fact that he does not see the Rangers really being a team to expect to be active at all in free agency. Between what they have on their roster now and what their cap space is, they have their own players to kind of consider signing. Obviously, they got some RFAs that need to be done. And you know what? At this point, the Rangers really can't afford to bring players in unless there's players going out, and obviously that makes sense. He even references the fact that it might have to be 2, 3, or 4 players that would leave for one bigger name to come in. So it depends on who that bigger name is and what they make for salary, obviously. So that makes sense that a Jack Eichel trade could still be something that interests them. We've seen different reports about all these teams being in and out. I'm not really buying a lot of it, to be honest, because like I said, I think it's a little bit still early in the process here for anybody to be completely out on Eichel, unless there's more talks that have progressed behind the scenes that we're aware of. It just seems like we're probably still a couple of weeks away from a trade really coming together and being formally announced. At least that's maybe my gut instinct. It could happen sooner. I mean, we don't know everything that Adams is discussing here with other teams, but a team like the Rangers, it makes sense why they would still be in, given that kind of situation. If they can make an upgrade, that would have to be that way through trade. Or if it's not Eichel, it could be somebody else. If they want to bring in a big name player, then a couple of other players are going to have to leave town to make the salary cap space. It's just quite simple like that. Now, they have their own guys, too, that they can consider extending this offseason, and it's going to be interesting to see how they proceed with that. Do they look at doing extensions for guys like Mika Zibanejad or Ryan Strome, or do they end up finding ways to upgrade, or how do they handle that? I mean, the way Zibanejad's played the last few years, you would think he'd be a shoo-in to get an extension, but if they go for a guy like Eichel, that could change the whole team dynamic in the salary structure and what they can afford and not afford. So we'll have to see. But either way, if the Rangers are going to make adjustments or changes to their team, it's going to have to be through trade. I don't expect much in free agency. So I do agree with Larry Brooks on that point from the article. But he also goes on to talk about the New York Islanders. He talks about a couple of things here. One, he says that he feels that the New York Islanders need to have a more dynamic winger to play with Matthew Barzal, and that guys like Eberle and Komarov just are not dynamic enough and aren't cutting it. Where have I heard that before? Yeah, it's exactly what I said in the New York Islanders offseason plan video. So yes, I agree wholeheartedly here with Larry Brooks' analogy, and I know of at least a few Isles fans that I've talked to that certainly feel the same way as well. It's certainly a scenario that when it comes to push comes to shove here, they can't get the offense they need. And a guy like Barzal has to carry this team on his back, and it's hard when you have other teams that are so strong defensively deep in the playoffs. They can really focus on him, and it takes away a lot of the options. I mean, they do have a lot of, mid-range offensive players that are good guys, but, guys like Bailey and Nelson and Beauvillier, like, they're good hockey players, but they just need something a little bit more dynamic who can kind of take over a game. And even Anders Lee, who was out injured in the playoffs, will help with that when he gets back. But still, they could use another scorer. They just don't have quite enough to get over that hump. So therefore, he does expect the Islanders will likely try to move Jordan Eberle, and to make that happen, even Komarov as well. Komarov doesn't have much term on his deal. He's only down to 1 year. Eberle's got a little bit more term at $5 million. He goes over the fact that Eberle could be exposed in the expansion draft, which is also something that I've said in recent videos, which I do agree with. It would not be shocking to see them do that. Doesn't mean that Seattle's going to take him. I don't know if they would really bite on him because of the term, but it's still a scenario that we could see happen, and obviously that would send a signal to the league if Eberle's not taken. That means he's likely going to be at least tried to be traded. But he also goes on to talk about the fact that they could move Nick Leddy at $5.5 million. Not much term left on that. It might be easier to trade. Could also be another way to free up some money to make sure that they can go after another scorer. So clearly, this is exactly what I said in my Islanders offseason video. So just nice to see other mainstream news reporters kind of having the same opinions as me. Clearly, it just kind of goes to show that we might be on something. Doesn't mean these moves are going to be easy here. They're not going to be at all. Like Eberle and Leddy's contracts are not simple tasks to move. I mean, Leddy is possible. Komarov is possible because of the term, but Eberle will be more challenging. But we will see what happens, but Larry Brooks believes that is likely the focus here of Lou Lamoriello and the Islanders heading into this offseason. Now, lastly, I want to touch on the Detroit Red Wings and the fact that they're one of the few teams that have tons of cap space, and how will they weaponize it to kind of take advantage of other teams. Now, I want to reference an article there in Detroit Hockey Now by Kevin Allen, where he goes over a number of teams that we might see Detroit try to swing trades with to take advantage of those situations. For example, young defender Vince Dunn is stuck in St. Louis. He's likely going to be moved. Obviously, they're at risk to lose him in expansion if he still remains on the Blues roster, because he's very unlikely to be protected. So if he doesn't go to Seattle, Detroit makes a good landing spot for him. They could take advantage of that situation and probably get him without giving up too much. Vince Dunn's a young defenseman looking for a bigger role, and Detroit would certainly be one of those teams where he could get that. So if I'm Detroit, I would certainly consider that for sure. Makes sense for Yzerman to take advantage. That's what he's been doing for the better part of the last year or so. And I can certainly understand and make sense why he would continue to do that. Why not accumulate pieces that can help you now, as well as possibly few things for the future, while not giving up a whole lot in return and kind of putting your cap space to use. Now, you could also talk to a team like the Hurricanes. They're another team that's going to likely have at least one defenseman exposed that they really don't want to have to do that for. So maybe they can try to swing a trade for like a guy, maybe it's a Brady Shea. I'm not sure who they end up leaving available. A lot of that's probably going to depend on what Dougie Hamilton does. Now, if Hamilton ends up going to Seattle, even if he's a UFA that's unprotected, that might prevent the Hurricanes from losing an additional player there. So it's hard to say. So we may or may not see the Hurricanes make a deal. But even a guy like Jake Gardner, who's kind of really not in their plans, and I think they regret signing him at this point. He's not really playing up to the point offensively that he did in Toronto. I know in Toronto he got a lot of criticism for his defensive play, but he's not even getting the offensive looks or putting up any kind of points anywhere close to what he did in Toronto. He's just not getting the opportunity to play a big enough role to have that chance. So, even though he's certainly declined a bit in his play, I think it's fair to say, I can see maybe for the right price or the extra incentives being added in, that maybe Detroit would consider that, if not Brady Shea as well. One of those two guys is a real possibility they could look at. And you can't forget Matt Dumba in Minnesota. I mean, Dumba would be a good pickup for Yzerman and the Red Wings. Doesn't mean Dumba would prefer to play there. I'm not sure what his feelings are, but obviously he doesn't have the trade protection in his contract like a lot of his defensive teammates that are going to be protected over him because of their no-move clauses. So certainly I do expect Matt Dumba to be one of those players that are, very highly, highly likely traded ahead of expansion. Detroit could be one of those teams depending on what kind of deal they can work out with Minnesota. But certainly as these teams get closer to expansion and they're running out of time, basically teams like Detroit, New Jersey, Ottawa with the cap space can kind of swoop in here and say, listen, we're not going to give you a lot, but we'll take that player off your hands so that Seattle doesn't get him for nothing. So I fully suspect teams like Detroit and the other ones I've mentioned to weaponize their space and fully take advantage of that. It's only the smart thing to do. And I can see Yzerman and the Wings being the biggest players probably when it comes to that kind of market. So we'll see what happens. There's going to be a lot more news and rumors here ahead of expansion and free agency. We still have less than 2 weeks to go now until expansion time. I know we will see some trades. A lot of it's likely not going to really get into full gear here until the Stanley Cup finals are completed. The Stanley Cup is awarded, of course, which could happen as soon as tomorrow evening, which is Game 4 against Montreal and Tampa. If Tampa wins in a sweep in the playoffs, come to an end on Monday night. Of course, we have the buyout window is going to open 24 hours later. You're going to see some teams make moves in that regard. Once the 24 hours are up, we'll find out what teams are likely going to start doing buyouts. There probably isn't going to be a ton of them, but there are definitely going to be some that will help teams kind of set themselves up for a little bit better of a cap situation moving forward. And then that will kind of dictate what other moves we might see. And then it'll just be the beginning of the very busy month of July that I foresee happening here in NHL news when it comes to all the different transactions we're going to see. So stay tuned for all that as we get closer and closer to the busy time of the month. So let me know your thoughts and everything discussed down below in the comments. We'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the latest news and rumors on all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.